I'm going to mute myself too, guys. So, okay, Brad, you're on.
All right. Again, my name's Brad Cameron, and I am the president of Neighbors for Greater Capitol Hill, and I'm a longtime resident of the Cheesman Park area. And I want to thank Cindy and Maggie for this invitation to talk about this issue concerning the Golden Triangle and the Cheesman Park View Plane. Just so folks know, a couple of weeks ago, Carolyn Shop and Michael Henry and myself were on a Zoom meeting with Christopher Johnson and Abe Barge from the planning department, along with Shane Brady from Neighbors and about 3 residents of the Golden Triangle area who's on the advisory board. So we've had some discussions, and this is sort of to repeat a lot of what I think we've already have talked about. But and I've got a few different slides, and the first one, which you've all been able to look at, is an historical view of the mountains, and this is taken just to the south and the east of the Cheesman Park Pavilion. And I wasn't able to figure out exactly when this is from, but given the fact that there are there's no landscaping around it or whatever, I'm guessing that this picture was taken shortly after the pavilion was first constructed, which happened back in 1910. So we've got a very early shot of the Capitol area, and then of course the absolute grandeur of the mountains. And I'm sure, as everybody knows, the big peak that looms right up above what we believe is Doramore School, that is Mount Evans. But I want to point out, then obviously there's other lesser peaks on either side of it. But one peak I do want to point out in particular is over on the right side of Mount Evans. And it's one that probably a lot of folks don't know, but it's very prominent on our horizon. It has the now politically awkward name of Squaw Mountain. And it is that mountain over on the right that's got a snowfield there on its right flank, a little bit over farther to the right, Maggie, if you're the one with that. It's basically right above the top of the stairs. Keep going to the right with your little pointer. Keep going a little bit more there. That is Squaw Mountain. And now the obvious thing looking at this, clearly, the city itself was very different, but what's so unbelievably striking is how young our urban forest was. It clearly was in infancy. You can just see some trees, but boy, they're very, very small. And we started with this because this mountain view and other incredible views around the city are a real source of civic pride amongst us Denverites. I mean, these are the kind of views that make Denver unique and special and really appreciated by residents and our visitors. This is the kind of thing that makes Denver, Denver. Now, given the importance of this view, Maggie, if you want to go on to the next slide, back in the early 1970s, the importance of that mountain view you were just looking at was recognized by the city of Denver when it enacted a view plane ordinance to protect it. Now what you see here is a map of the Cheesman Park Botanic Gardens view plane, and it shows the point of origin for the protective ordinance and also its boundaries. And as you can see, the point of origin is not actually in Cheesman Park. It's instead over on the east side of the Botanic Gardens in an elevation point of, as you can see marked there, 5,383 feet. And from that point, the area burdened by the view plane ordinance spreads out like a fan as it goes to the west. And the way the view plane ordinance works is the farther away a building is from the point of origin, the taller it can be. And the ratio is for every 100 feet that you move away from the origin point, you get an extra 1 foot of elevation for a building. Now, one of the things important to note on this map is that currently the boundary, the western boundary of the view plane for Cheesman Park terminates at Broadway. And then to the west of that lies the Golden Triangle, which I'm sure pretty much everyone's familiar with. It's that area that's bound by Lincoln on the east, Spear Boulevard on the south and west, and Colfax on the north. Now, I also want to especially point out, if you look over in the far left side of this map, you'll see the area of West 9th Avenue, West 8th Avenue. And that is really the southern end, the southern tip, so to speak, of the Golden Triangle when talking about the Cheesman PARC view plane, because it is directly in line between the Cheesman PARC Pavilion and the peak of Mount Evans. And so that's a pretty critical area there. Now, the issue that we're here to talk about is the proposed rezoning of the Golden Triangle. And starting last year, CPD with Christopher and Abe started a process in conjunction with the Golden Triangle Advisory Committee to rezone the area. And this followed the adoption about 4 or 5 years ago of a new neighborhood plan for the Golden Triangle area. Currently, the Golden Triangle area is zoned to limit buildings to about 175 feet, which provides and allows for a building of about 18 stories or so. So the current zoning has allowed a significant amount of development to occur recently within the Golden Triangle area. Most recent, there's a very large building called PARC located at Botanic and Spear, recently completed, and within the last year or so, the Avita, another very large building on Cherokee Street just south of 13th Avenue. Now, the current zoning, in addition to allowing buildings up to the 18-story height approximately, the current zoning also allows the buildings to pretty much occupy all of the lot size that they are on. So the result has been, at least from a lot of the folks in the Golden Triangle area, it's been to create some pretty large and relatively bulky 18-story buildings. And after having seen these in place, what we heard from the Golden Triangle folks is that the fear was that if this building form is replicated everywhere within the Golden Triangle, it was gonna create some pretty dark canyons that would really block the sky and really reduce the desirability and the pedestrian feel of the Golden Triangle. So as a partial solution to that problem, what's come forward is this proposal for what are called point towers that could be constructed up to 300 feet in height. And one way to describe it is that simply you kind of take the volume of space that currently would be in a building that's allowed to go up to 200 feet, and instead you would put it in a 300-foot tall building on top of a 4 to 5 foot tall podium that would result in a tower more than the large blocky buildings that we're presently getting. Now, if this were to be adopted, this point tower proposal for the Golden Triangle, it would not be the first time that it's happened in Denver. A couple of years ago, when the Arapahoe Square rezoning occurred, the point tower concept was included. And recently there's been created what's called the Downtown Design Advisory Board that has been overseeing some of the buildings that have been going into the Arapahoe Square area. And having watched a couple of those hearings, I would say that to a certain extent, the point tower is a little bit of a misnomer because the buildings certainly can be very large in and of themselves and big. Now, the proposal for these 300-foot towers in the Golden Triangle came out in the public about in February. And when some of us in Neighbors for Greater Capitol Hill learned of it, we went to planning to develop it, and particularly to Abe, and we asked the question because we really didn't quite know. We asked, how are these 300-foot towers going to impact the mountain view from Cheesman Park? And I think at that point in time, I'm not sure it had been considered thoroughly. And in response, Maggie, if you want to go to the next slide, wrong way, slide 3, yep. CPD generated some information that tried to analyze and took a look at how point towers would interact with the mountain view. And what you see here is a graphic that was produced by Planning and Development. And it's a cross-section hypothetical view looking north-south, from a north-south perspective on a cross-section of the Golden Triangle. I believe it's along 10th Avenue. Now, you may recall I mentioned that the existing view plane extends over to Broadway. And you can see on the right side of this graphic, the solid red line on the right side, and down below it in red is the Cheesman PARC Botanic Gardens View Plane. It's got a little bit of a reddish tint to that box. And that is the area where the height of buildings is currently restricted by the view plane from Cheesman Park and the Botanic Gardens. Then as you look farther off to the left, and which is going west, so to speak, on this cross section, you'll see a very dark, solid gray line that kind of goes across the screen. And that's depicting a 200-foot line that buildings could be built up to, and that's part of the proposal that's coming forward in the rezoning effort. So you see the 200-foot line for buildings, and then you'll see depicted, there's point tower A, B, and C starting from the right going to the left. And you'll see kind of the dashed gray line at the top of those buildings. And that's depicting the 300-foot limit. And those sort of gray buildings are where, you know, hypothetical point towers would be. And as you'll see what's depicted then, for example, under point tower A, it shows that it would go approximately 90 feet up into the area that, if the view plane extended west of Broadway, would intrude into the view plane area. And then as you go off to the west for point tower B, it's only 70 feet, and then point tower C, it's 60 feet. So what this does show is that, yes, indeed, point towers would intrude into the view plane from Cheesman Park if the view plane extended off to the west. And I should note that nothing in the zoning proposal currently intends to change any of the mountain view plane ordinances that burden parts of the Golden Triangle, because in addition to the one from Cheesman Park, there's also one from the steps of the state capitol. Now, CBD correctly asserted that there is more to this story than just this graphic. And also then, and this was in a packet of information that was prepared for a informational meeting that was held by the planning board, considering the pace of development on the Golden Triangle plan. And so in conjunction with this, there was some other information that was released by Planning Development that attempted to show what point towers would look like when viewed from Cheesman Park. And based upon this information, the email that Planning Development sent out concluded, and I quote, that taller point towers won't be visible from the Cheesman Park Pavilion. Now, when several of us from neighbors for Greater Capitol Hill read that and talked about it, we questioned that conclusion, primarily because the modeling that was done by Planning and Development at that point in time did not include any hypothetical 300-foot towers down in the southern end of the Golden Triangle. And you remember that's the area that really is most critical in terms of the mountain view, because it lies directly between Mount Evans and the Cheesman Park Pavilion. So at that point in time, we reached out to an architect who we know and asked if he'd be able to help. He agreed so, and came back with the next slide that Maggie has. Would be slide number, what are we up to? Number 4, I believe, Maggie. Keep going. There you go. All right. So this was the modeling that we were able to have developed. And I want to take a little time to explain it. The base picture for this is a recent photograph of Mount Evans. This was taken from the southern end of the plaza right on the west side of the Cheesman Park Pavilion. The red vertical line that you can see very prominent there in the picture, that depicts the southern terminus of the Golden Triangle. Essentially, that's the intersection of Broadway and Spear. So everything on the left side of that vertical red line is outside of the Golden Triangle area and would not be at all impacted. But everything on the right side of it in this picture is within the area that's contemplated for rezoning in the Golden Triangle. Now, then you'll see the dashed green line, the horizontal green line, and that depicts the 300-foot elevation level that would be right at Broadway. And again, going back to the previous slide, you may recall, that's the height that is being proposed to allow point towers to be built. Now, those two gray boxes outlined in black there are just hypothetical 300-foot towers that could be constructed in the southern tip of the Golden Triangle. They could be anywhere. In fact, you could have one over almost to the red vertical line, but they just are kind of representing what a 300-foot tower in the very southern end of the triangle might appear to be from Cheesman Pavilion. Now, I want to point out, if you remember, I mentioned earlier and pointed out Squaw Mountain, and that big high-rise there in the middle of the thing is referred to as Cheesman Gardens. It obviously is a huge intrusion on the mountain view. And just to the left of that, right above the gray building there, you'll see what pokes out, and that's Squaw Mountain. As you can see, it's almost completely obstructed by that hypothetical 300-foot tower. And then as you go off to the left, farther south, while Mount Evans itself is not completely obstructed, a 300-foot tower would certainly take a pretty big chunk out of it. So I want to point out also and just mention that during this time period following the April 15th planning board meeting, Abe and Christopher did do some additional modeling to try to take a look at the southern tip of the Golden Triangle, and forwarded that to us, and we looked at it. And when we had our discussion a couple of weeks ago, I think we concluded that their modeling did match up pretty much with what you're seeing here in terms of our modeling. And from our perspective, we think that it is pretty clear that there certainly will be the possibility that 300-foot towers at the southern end of the Golden Triangle would be visible from the Cheesman Park Pavilion. And we think that it presents a fairly significant risk of harm to the mountain view from the Cheesman Park Pavilion. Now, you might ask, well, so what really is there currently there at the southern tip of the Golden Triangle? And if you can visualize it, most prominently is the Rickenbaugh Cadillac Volvo dealership. That is, it's on the west side of Broadway there, just north of Spear, and it's an assemblage of property comprised itself of a triangle of 8th Avenue, Broadway, and Spear. That's one of the very big sites. And then, the block to the north of that, which would be essentially the 800 block of Vacoma and 800 block of Broadway. Those are sort of the most critical area. And if you look at a map, we're really only talking probably about 3 or 4 square blocks out of the totality of the Golden Triangle area. So moving forward, when we got our modeling results back, we had sent it to Abe and Christopher, and also to Ann Lindsay, who's a resident of the Golden Triangle area, has been involved in a lot of Capitol Hill committees and serves on the Golden Triangle Advisory Board. And we asked to have an online meeting to talk about this issue more. And both Christopher and Abe responded immediately, and we organized a meeting that I mentioned previously. That happened back on May 5th, and there were 9 of us that got on a similar sort of conference like this and talked about the issue. And I feel that that meeting really provided a very good forum for an open and frank discussion, both about the concerns how 300-foot towers might impact the mountain view from Cheesman Park, and also about the concerns from Golden Triangle and how they hope that 300-foot towers might alleviate some of the canyon effect that they're worried might happen under the current zoning. So, you know, we didn't reach any conclusions in that meeting, but it is certainly the hope of those of us in Neighbors for Greater Capitol Hill that that meeting is going to be a springboard for additional discussion as we move forward on the zoning project. And as Abe mentioned, there's still lots of time going on. It isn't anything that's contemplated to be wrapped up anytime soon. I think, if I remember right, it was towards the end of this year when they might be trying to move it forward for council approval, but it's still certainly in the discussion phases. So now it's Maggie, let's go to the very last picture. Would be picture number 5 down there. And I wanted to end with this. This is a picture that was taken just a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, the trees hadn't leafed out yet. And it's from the vantage point of the west side of the Cheesman Park Pavilion. It was taken right there, if you can picture it. It's the little podium that has the mountain view on a tablet. And I think it's important because you really can see that, you know, despite the very mature urban forest that we have, and despite all the development that's occurred over the years, you know, there it is, Mount Evans in all its glory. It really is an incredible sight. It's the kind of things, you know, folks in Omaha or Indianapolis or other places like that simply do not have the benefit of some of these views that we here in Denver really cherish. And the important thing is to again recognize that, you know, the Cheesman Park Pavilion is a public place. It's a spot where the public can go and still see Mount Evans and a mountain view. And we really think that these views are incredibly important, and they're a public resource that's been entrusted to us, and we hope to avoid jeopardizing it. So thank you very much. That's the end of my comments, and I guess now we can see if there are questions or comments or discussion. So Cindy?
Yes, and thank you very much, Brad. That was very helpful. I am asking, now I have to open up here to see about questions. If anybody has questions or a comment that they would like to make. I think this has, personally, I think this has potential impact on other view planes. But potentially, you know, who knows, but there are other view planes, and the question is, if this can be impacted this way, then how can they be impacted another way? So I don't have everybody on my screen. If you
I have my hand raised.
Just a minute. Who's talking?
This is Ian.
Ian. Okay. Thank you, Ian. I got it. Thank you. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. I want to start by first saying thank you, Brad. I think this is really amazing. The graphics you put together to really show the impact is really important. I have more to learn about this topic. I do just want to take a moment to acknowledge that these mountains weren't always called Mount Evans or named after these people who were involved in the genocide of the people who lived here. Maybe people know, but I'm descended from the Jicarilla Apache, the Zuni, the Comanche, the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, the Dene, the Utes. They all lived here before. And the naming of these mountains is a contentious conversation. I do believe in their beauty, but I think it only fair to acknowledge now that Mount Evans and many of these other names may come to change someday.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Anyone else? Again, I don't have everybody's video up here, so if you will speak up, does anyone else have any questions or concerns?
No, Sam.
Cindy, I have a question.
Jay Rest.
Jay Rest.
Okay. Go, please go.
Okay. Brad, how did this ordinance come about to protect the view planes? What made that happen?
Well, Jay, my understanding is, it was enacted back in the early 70s, which certainly predates my time here. I'm going to ask Michael Henry if he'd like to chime in. He does have a better background on this, and he's also got a great story that he might want to share regarding the big high-rise there on the west side of the park, Cheesman Gardens. So Michael, do you have anything to share about your recollections of why the Mountain View ordinances were being put in place?
Well, everyone, that was a tiny bit before my time as well, when the ordinance passed. But I think most people are aware that in the early 70s, there was a great movement nationwide for environmental protection and also for neighborhood protection. At any rate, there was a court case about that giant high-rise at 10th and Humboldt, and a number of citizens sued, saying that it violated the Mountain View Protection Ordinance from Cheesman Park, which had just recently been passed. And the court decided, and it's clear that it was correct as a legal matter, that since the building permit had been dated before, and I think it was like 2 days before the passage of the ordinance, it was, the construction was legal and was allowed. However, an awful lot of neighbors and very, very competent neighbors have always been convinced that the building permit was illegally backdated. And I don't think that's ever really been litigated and proven one way or the other. But at any rate, that's sort of the early history. And if I could just mention one other different point, and it's the same point I think that Cindy Johnstone was trying to make. There are about 24 view planes around the city. And unfortunately, I don't think very many people in the city, government or neighborhood groups, are paying very close attention. And I would hope that this would jumpstart some thinking by a lot of us. One in particular, some of you may have followed. About 3 months ago, there was a rezoning which City Council did pass in the Overland neighborhood, just west of Broadway, around I live. And there is a view plane protection ordinance from what's known as the State Home Park. And the neighbors in the Rosedale neighborhood loudly protested and argued to City Council that would really, even though the view plane stopped at Broadway or stops at Broadway, it was going to ruin the view that the Rosedale neighborhood folks have. And if you ever want to see a really wonderful view, go down to Rosedale and look west along I live.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. Any other comments or people Wendy.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for doing the meeting. So I've got a lot of concerns, and I know I've communicated them to the park committee and to the Inc. board, so they're not unfamiliar to you. But let's just talk about the view plane. So I live in Cranmer Park, Hilltop neighborhood, the RNO, and Cranmer Park, many of us are very aware of the view plane, and it's very important to us, and it's limited some of the development in the Cherry Creek area in order to protect the view plane in Cranmer Park. And so there are some of us, we haven't, put it out to a survey to the neighborhood, but if need be, we will. But some of us are concerned that your statement in your email notices to Inc. members and to the media about this stated that you were going to expand the view plane. And my concern is if you expand the view plane in Cheesman Park, then you open up the view plane ordinance to change from other avenues. So someone might be able to argue that if you expand it, you can reduce it. And we adamantly will oppose this. I can tell you that. I will work hard to make sure that we adamantly oppose it if this makes reducing the view plane in our neighborhood possible. And I suspect many other neighborhoods in Denver would feel the same way. So I would be careful about your use of the term expanding the view plane. Am I clear on that?
Yes, you are.
Thank you.
Thank
So, so then we can talk about process a little bit later. So
Yes.
I'll leave it with that. I actually did ask someone who was involved in creating the view plane ordinance, and they said that the legal possibility of that happening is logical and possible. So I'm gonna cut my mic off right now and we can move on. Anybody else can talk about the view plane ordinance and its expansion or reduction, but I've said my piece.
And thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that. Brad, did you want to?
Yeah, and Wendy, if I could just briefly respond, I certainly would share your concern, but just so you're aware, there are currently efforts underfoot to limit in size, or I guess I would say amend by reducing the size of the view plane ordinance from City Park. And so it is a concept that certainly is out there, and it's being very much talked about in the context of rezoning along Sherman Street. And so I would share your concern with that, but it is already something that is being approached and is being talked about. So the idea is out there, definitely.
Abe, could I ask you to speak to that for just a little bit?
Sure, let me just get unmuted. Yeah, so I'm not an expert on the view plane ordinance. Any changes to that would have to be approved by City Council. I think there have been some changes over time. It's fairly rare. Typically it's new view planes being created or expansion. There has been discussion kind of prompted by a big development proposal on Sherman Street, just on the east side of downtown. I haven't heard much of that for some time, so I'm not really sure what's going on with that. It doesn't seem to be in any imminent prospect of moving forward. There's also been some talk about changes to the view plane that begins at the old City Hall, which doesn't exist anymore, but at the edge of Lodo, right on Spear Boulevard. I think Christopher may know more about where that stands, though.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
And I thank everybody who's helping me see if somebody's hand's up, because I can't see any. Maria.
Thank you, Cindy. I just want to mention with respect to the City Park View Plane, maybe some of the City Park folks who are on this Zoom call can help me remember, but specifically that proposed development on Sherman Street that would be 40 stories and would require some sort of a change to the view plane ordinance is my understanding. One of the arguments that the proponents of the development are using is that there are already skyscrapers west of Broadway. So it becomes a little bit of a slippery slope if there are skyscrapers in the Golden Triangle, and then 20 years from now, when nobody remembers, that's used as some sort of a precedent to get a change in the view plane east of Broadway. So that's the way the dialogue has been going, and we City Park fans are very worried about the view plane that is enjoyed from the West Terrace of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would like to just make a mention. I went to Cheesman. I've been to Cheesman Park a number of times, but I went there, and because of our stay-at-home policy right now, or was, the air was beautiful, the sky was beautiful, and I looked south and I saw the two, what I call bookend apartments that are due south from Cheesman. And they look so out of place. And so those are the kind of things I'm hearing what you're saying is that it, you know, if it looks out of place, it might be out of place, even if it's legal. Is that Michael?
Cindy, could I speak for 1 minute?
Yes.
I would just like to clarify at least what my own thinking is. That there is not one Mountain View ordinance. There are about 23 of them, they're all in the same place in the municipal code. And by the way, it's not in the zoning code, it's in a separate chapter entirely. But a change to one view plane would not necessarily change anything. Now, Wendy's point may be that it sort of sets a precedent, but if a change is made to the Cheesman Park ordinance or the City Park ordinance, that would not have an effect on all the rest of them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification, Michael. I appreciate that. We have a couple more minutes left. Are there any? Let me back up. I asked Brad about the presentation tonight, and one of the purposes of INC is to educate and to help people be knowledgeable about what is happening in the city. And that is tonight's purpose, is not to make a decision, it's not to endorse or anything, but it's just to be aware. And I think that it's important, especially because we have people here in our meetings from all different places in the city, and that it's important to know that these kind of things are being discussed. And so I'm just trying to clarify that we're not going to make any decision, but if you have any other question or would like to make a statement, please raise your hand. Let me just see. Anybody?
Say it again.
So,
Oh,
Katie would like to.
Okay. Katie, go ahead.
Okay, this is Katie Fisher over by the University of Denver. And what we ran into up at this end is we used to have a view plane being the University of Denver as one of the points. They were able to build their own buildings on their own land, violating their own view plane, but it also took with us in our entire area, our view plane. So we have, like everyone over in Oberlin, are very, very concerned, and we have fought tooth and nail for the slim looks we do still have, because it's very easy to not understand the view plane. I was one of the people who was always complaining our new visions for Denver and stuff like that, why that wasn't all in the code highlighted. Because I like all of you, think we lose these view planes, we lose property value, we lose, just the visual reason we're in Colorado. And so I think this is critical. And there still seems to be ways for people to get around these things, and the surrounding area back to the east does not get to weigh in like the people to the west. And it's the east people who lose the views.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christopher, could you mention how you let people know about what was happening with this? It's not decided, and I hear that very clearly. But in working with the Golden Triangle, were you reaching out to other people recognizing that that could be impacted?
Yeah, so we started this process back in March of last year, March of 2019, and pulled together this advisory committee of Golden Triangle residents and property owners, business owners, some design professionals, et cetera. And any of our public meetings or online surveys, we advertise those via the RNOs that are within the nearby area. So Capitol Hill would have been notified. I believe INC also receives notification as well, just as standard practice for any public event. And so we had community meetings, community open houses, and online surveys back in June of last year, and then September. And then we were scheduled to have a third one here in the middle of March, and we ended up having to cancel that, obviously, because that was right when things started to be shut down for the pandemic. And so we ended up converting what was to be our in-person third public open house into an online virtual open house, and that's in part how the information then started to get out, and we heard from Brad and from Michael and others about raising this question of what a 300-foot building might do in terms of that mountain view, and that's where we find ourselves today. And Brad, I want to say actually that was a really good presentation and very well put together and very detailed. So thank you for that. We should hire you to come and work. I thought that was very successful. So thank you for doing that.
Cindy?
Yeah. Yes.
I'd like to make a comment.
Okay.
I totally support what is viewed as unique designs instead of just having big block buildings, rectangular to whatever height. But I also believe that those designs could be incorporated without having to tower way above view planes. And I also believe that people of Denver respect quality of life and enjoyment of the mountains. These view planes need to be protected. They need to be honored. And people who are into developing areas that are infringing upon that are not thinking about how their assets could be even more endured by respecting what needs to happen.
Thank you, Jay. I appreciate that. And we're going to have to close on this discussion just for time purposes. But I really appreciate everybody who came. And Alex and Chris, I would really appreciate if you can help INC Parks Committee know how this unfolds. I'm going to guess that Brad will also, but I just think that it's something that's more citywide than not, and it's the awareness that's very difficult. So I would appreciate that if you could let us know how this this piece of the neighborhood plan comes along. Is that possible?
Yes, absolutely, that's possible. And feel free to share my email address. And you can also find that if on the project website, which is pretty simple. It's just denvergov.org/golden triangle, all one word. And you can find my contact information there. So if you are interested in staying apprised of any future notifications and things like that, feel free to email me and I will add your name and contact information to our project list, so that in any future notifications about next steps, other opportunities for public engagement, you would receive that, and we are happy to continue to have the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Cindy, this is Woody Garnsey, not Georgia, because I had to go to her computer. But just real quickly, did you want any kind of an update on what's going on with our charter amendment?
Oh, yes. No. Wait just a minute, because right now we're just ending this discussion about the view plane. But we have the our next, I'm going to just segue into it. Thank you, Woody. Our next discussion has to do with Save Our Open Space. It has the Park Hill Golf Course has been in the news quite a bit, and there's a group that's working very hard. Woody is the sort of the very lead on this, and there's some new information about process and what might be happening. Woody, do you want to talk to it, or you want?
Well, I'd be happy to do it quickly. There's some other fine people from our group on this call, but just real quickly, I hope everyone knows that right now we have a proposal before the city council, which started out with the Charter Review Committee, to refer as a charter amendment a proposal that we were going to do as an initiated ordinance. And we got approval for the initiated ordinance language on March 21st, but because of the COVID-19 issue, we really haven't felt we're in a position to start trying to go out and collect signatures. So we've asked City Council to basically take the same language and plug it in as a charter amendment. And essentially what that proposal does is to require a vote of all Denver citizens, all Denver electors, before there could be any commercial or residential construction either on designated parkland or land protected by a conservation easement, and also before a conservation easement could be canceled. That's the essence of what we're asking. And we had a hearing, we've had two hearings, one of which allowed citizens to actually have a little bit of input, and the second one was on Monday. It got out of the review committee by a vote of 6-5. And at this point, it would move forward to the Finance and Governance Committee at the end of June, which is not a terribly helpful committee for our effort, because the 3 of the 6 members are opposed to what we want to do, including the chair and the co-chair. So it's possible that this effort, by the way, is being led by Councilwoman Candy C. DeBaca. She's the point person for it. She's done an incredibly effective job, and just as a plug for her, I have to urge all of you to get to know her a little bit. She's very smart and very articulate, and she's been a big help. And so even if this doesn't get through the Governance and Finance Committee, which would be highly unlikely, Candy, if we think we have 7 votes, could direct file the same language, and it could get on the November 3 ballot. So that's where it is now, and we're going to be hoping to get people to talk to their council members and urge them to support referring this. It's basically, we picked up the same ballot title as the successful anti-Olympics measure had. We got permission to use Let Denver Vote, and except we're calling this Park and Open Space Preservation Let Denver Vote. So that's just a quick summary. There are other people on this call who are equally involved, and I'll let them pitch in.
Okay. Harry, would you like to say anything more?
Oh, I think Woody summarized it very well. Again, I will echo his comment that the support that you can provide by contacting your council person would be very critical in this. They did raise some issues in the Monday meeting that, for the most part, I think we felt they were really throwing up a lot of chaff. I mean, the ones that, and I will name the ones I can recall that said no. Robin Knish, help me out here. Let's see now. We had a kind of a weak, you know.
Don't forget our friend Chris Herndon, Harry.
Sorry?
Don't forget our friend Chris Herndon.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, he goes without saying he opposes it because he's always been in favor of development of this area anyway. I mean, it was interesting. The sense of the committee, in my feeling, is that we had a lot of support. Obviously, we had 6 votes in our favor. In addition, there were a couple others that said, you know, we generally support what you want to accomplish here, but they did have some reservations about, you know, does it really belong in the charter? Because it's sort of like a constitutional amendment. And I understand that. But this is such an overriding, important citywide issue that may be the most appropriate place for it. So again, Kendra Black was another heavy no. And there was a 4th one. Oh, Stacy Gilmore, of course, opposes this. So those were probably the strongest no's that we had on.
Kevin Flynn voted against it.
Kendra, yes.
Kevin
Flynn.
Flynn.
Oh, Kevin, right, yes. Yeah, and again, that's kind of a mixed picture. He was very strong about the point that, well, this council will never vote to terminate the conservation easement. But of course, that's the entire point of this discussion that Westside has led, is to terminate the conservation easement. So a little disconnect there, dissonance.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the people, this is Woody again, one of the people we hope is a supporter, because he supported our position during the spring election last year to preserve the conservation easement and eventually to have the land purchased by the city to be a regional park. But I think it's not clear that Chris has recently told us that he supports our charter amendment proposal, but it's a little bit on the, I'd have to say honestly to this group, a little bit on the soft side. So anyone, you know, in this group or otherwise in INC who has a relationship with Chris, hopefully could connect with him. And
That's Chris Hines, by the way.
Chris Hines. Yeah, not Chris Herndon. Chris Hines.
One of the things that's important to just bring up and is that there's a faction, not faction, there are people who are against this, who have other reasons that Park Hill should not be an open park, but they're to do a balance or have amenities for other things that is needed up in that area. INC Parks and Rec has been supportive of this in the sense that we don't have another 155 acres of open space in the city of Denver, and with the climate change and everything, and we've talked about this in committee to some extent, that it is important. It's an important piece for our children and everyone. So just wanted to put that out. It's not right now, there's nobody, Kenneth Ho is not here. So just do a balance, but development is a strong thing in this issue, a question of development.
And Cindy, may I just add one other thing? One thing that we're stressing, and I think it's important that anyone who supports what we're doing also stress, is that under state law, first of all, conservation easements are creatures of state statute, which means they exist only under state statute. And the state statute states explicitly that conservation easements are real estate assets. It's just like owning a hunk of land somewhere. And so what our message that we're trying to get out to the public and to the elected officials is that this is an invaluable real estate asset that's owned by the citizens of Denver and the city of Denver, and that needs to be protected for the benefit of all Denver citizens. And that's why we're saying that any significant change, on any of these points that I identified that are in the amendment, shouldn't happen unless the voters of Denver approve it. Just like now the charter requires voter approval before there can be a sale or a lease of any designated parkland. We're putting this in the same category.
And Cindy, to your point, the problem that we have with, and I'll sort of direct this to Abe, since you're a representative of the development committee for community development department, is that it seems that Westside has done a very good PR job of presuming that the conversation about what happens in Northeast Park Hill begins and ends with this one parcel of property. The reality is there's plenty of other opportunities to provide those amenities that don't, and housing that don't require development on this open space. And so I think that's why we need to make it sure that everyone understands that, sure, high density development is necessary. We have a vastly expanding population, but that makes the value of this open space even more critical. The fact that, yes, a couple of blocks away, there's available properties that should have, attainable housing for this neighborhood. There's more available property to the north, to the west, and none of which would require displacement. So again, we got to shift the conversation to, well, so what amount of development are we going to put on this one piece of property that happens to be owned by a speculative developer versus, well, let's look around the neighborhood, the immediate neighborhood of 40th and Colorado Transit Station, and see what we can do with that to bring in the amenities, the supermarkets, housing, and retail. So that's our goal as well. Not only to protect this one particular parcel, but to expand the scope of exactly where we need to satisfy this neighborhood's and this city's needs.
Thank you. I'm looking on the chat, and I know, Ian, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, I would. And then I saw Katie Fisher on there as well.
I did.
I didn't get to hear the beginning of the meeting. I'm sorry I was late. Perhaps this was mentioned, but I attended the Parks Board meeting this month, which was the first one virtually ever. And out of the Parks Board came a vote in support of extending money to purchase this land in their white paper. And so I want to make clear that the Parks Board has spoken there, and there was some genuine tension, obviously, with Happy Haynes and her there in that conversation. I know there were a lot of people who testified, but I was the only one who testified about Park Hill. In particular, there were people about Goose, some transits to Red Rocks. But I can say that just generally speaking, the amount of input from the community was greatly increased by having this virtual meeting. and by allowing that public comment. So I just think we should support that. And then I want to add one piece here that I'm meeting with Penfield Tate from the Let Denver Vote tomorrow. Perhaps some know that I'm the spokesperson for Resilient Denver, who's been approved for a charter amendment to ban fossil fuel extraction and the storage of toxic waste. We have already begun conversations with City Council and Clerk and Recorder Paul Lopez about going to electronic petitioning. And there are many groups, Let Denver Vote, Resilient Denver, and some others that are interested in all pushing forward at the same time. We already have the technology available. You can rent them in iPads for people to do the petitioning if you rent them from the city. And so we think the transition is easy. We believe that the path forward is legal because we are a home rule city to make these changes. And so I would welcome any of you, if you would like to help advance this Parks initiative or something for climate change, pushing for electronic petitioning puts the power back in the community's hand to leverage City Council to do something this November.
Ian, this is Woody. Could you bring us up to speed on just where you are with Paul Lopez's office on that point?
Paul Lopez's office has communicated to us that they're looking into the policy.
And do they think they have the power at the clerk and recorder level, or does this have to go through City Council?
City Council would have to make the legal authority change through ordinance, but because they're home rule, they have the ability to.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you. That's very informative, and that's something that is very important to all of us who live in Denver. I believe again. Katie, you had your hand up. Oh, okay. And Michael, I think you wanted to say something?
I'll go after Katie.
She said no, that she didn't have anything.
This is Michael Henry. I would encourage Katie and the committee to take a position in favor of this. And by that I mean the let the citizens vote on the Park Hill Golf Course. It seemed to me that maybe that support from INC could sway one or two council members.
We have been and have sent letters from the Parks Committee several times, and there was a vote, and also from INC. So we have sent, so to speak, reminder letters just to let people and attach those letters to it to remind them that that this is here, and that the Parks Committee and INC has still an interest in what is happening.
Okay.
Okay.
Cindy, this is Woody. The last thing I wanted to bring up was hopefully trying to get the Park Committee and possibly INC to pass new resolutions specifically supporting our charter amendment effort, because what's been done before has been very powerful. It's been focused on preserving the conservation easement and the ultimate acquisition by the city as a park. But this is a new issue that hasn't been addressed formally by the Park Committee or INC.
Okay. Maggie, let's see. Let me just think this one through. What is the timeline on this, Woody?
Well, the June 30th is the date, as we understand it, of this governance and the Finance and Governance Committee meeting.
Okay.
So I think, although we know that that's going to be a 3-3 tie at best, it would be good to get something, by, middle of June, end of June. It would be great.
We need to put our heads together, Maggie and I, to try to figure this out and how we could present it again to committee and then to the board. So let me, if you will, let me get back to you on that. Okay.
That's excellent.
Okay. Any other comments? I'm looking here too. I just want to let you know that Abe and Chris thanked very much to be here and be able to talk also with us. And I thought it was very helpful to have them here to clarify points. This is our first one, and we had a good attendance. You know, in some ways, it's sort of, and partly I miss being around you guys, but partly I really like that we had a good turnout and a good attendance. And there's a lot of power in doing meetings like this also, but, you know, in conjunction with others. So thank you for signing up. Really appreciate it. And we're moving along. How's that? We're all playing this by ear, but we're moving along. So if you don't have anything else, then I'm going to be ending the meeting, if that's okay.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you.
Cindy.
And
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
everyone.
everybody stay well. Stay well.
Thank you,
Stay
Woody.
well, stay
We're with you.
safe.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Let's see. How do you, Maggie? It's like,
On the right, you leave meeting.
yeah, no, I know that. Okay. Thank you. Ah.